Well, good morning, Trinity friends, and welcome back to our very last session with Jennine Hough, exploring the developing art of the early church. It has been an amazing 6 weeks. We have covered so much territory, and I'm looking forward to closing this out today with the Byzantine world of the 6th and 7th century. So we're just so excited to have you back with us this week. Just a note before we begin. We are in our summer schedule for Sunday mornings. So that means that our adult formation offerings will now begin at 9 a.m. And we'll be starting a new series next week following the lectionary and exploring the life of David from 1st and 2nd Samuel. Should be a fascinating summer to really dive deep into that piece. But before we do that, we get to explore one last time the wonderful world of Ravenna and the art of the early church with our fearless leader and guide, Jennine Hough. It has been a wonderful 6 weeks. I feel like I've gotten to do as close to international travel as I've been allowed to in the past 15 months. So first, thank you. And thank you for today.
Well, we are continuing today to look at Ravenna first, and we're also going to, David, do a little more traveling.
All right.
So I wanted just to remind you of, I'll go ahead and pull up this map. I love maps. I love to know everybody to know, in case you're just clicking in, where we are today. Ravenna is right here, 80 miles below Venice. And on the Adriatic, here's the Mediterranean, the Aegean, and the Black Sea. And we also are really involved today with Constantinople. We're also going to Israel, and we're also going to Mount Sinai. So we're doing quite a bit. I want to, here are some, this map is blurry, I'm sorry, but it does label a lot of the places. So Ravenna, Constantinople, and Israel, and Mount Sinai. So just reminding everyone, remember that we talked about early Christian art being about timing and not style. We saw a lot of influences in a lot of directions. We saw naturalism. We moved really from naturalism into some classical influences and saw, as we went through everything, symbolism and abstraction. And we never really had a specific style until we moved into Ravenna, late Ravenna, and to the Byzantine world. And the Byzantine art is a style, and I'm going to talk about that more as we go. But I wanted to mention a couple of things about Ravenna. Ravenna has had 3 historical regimes as far as art is concerned. The first one was the more Roman classical influence with the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia. And the second would have been the Arian churches to Sant Apollinare, the one in Ravenna Nuovo and the one in Classe. And we saw the beginnings of what we call the Byzantine style after the churches were dominated by Justinian and some of the Arian mosaics were removed. Those bottom 2 friezes in the Church of Sant Apollinare Nuovo. So think about that. And this city has preserved, even being hit in 2 world wars, it has really preserved Byzantine art more so than anywhere else. Constantinople has been a source of riots and destruction for years, and a lot remains there, but nothing like we've seen in Ravenna. So as we move on, we are in Ravenna at San Vitale, and this obvious aerial view, I want you to look down on this church, and you should be able to say whether it is a basilica plan or a central plan with what we've studied. So you also can identify it, I think, as an octagon. And the octagon style was really popular in the coming from Constantinople in this early Byzantine period. And today we are in the first golden era of Byzantine art. And if we look down on this church, just some things to point out to you that are different. Besides the octagon, the outer shape of it, we see that it's 3 stories, and the bottom story has windows all around, and we haven't been really seeing that. This would be your gallery where your women are seated, and then your top is your clerestory. And this is the view looking down on the apse, and these are 2 side chapels. And of course, these campanili are always later, 9th, 10th, 12th century. So a little view of approaching it in Ravenna on a side street. Always fun to see something fresh. And this is a different view. Here are our side chapels. We're shifting around to the right of the view you just saw, because I want you to see these windows from the outside, and also to see the buttressing. This was added later to support these walls. These walls actually had clay tubing that they used for support, because every time you put a window in, you're taking structure out. You're making it lighter and therefore more fragile. And so a lot of these early churches, and this even goes into the Gothic period with Notre Dame. We know it's supported with flying buttresses, the upper section. So this is the beginning kind of buttressing these mammoth buildings. And there was a lot of old Roman brick in here. So we're talking about spolia always, although the interior has nothing to do with pagan or Roman. So I want to show you the plan because it's just fascinating. This is the narthex, and it is at a different angle than the church. You can see the church has a west-east orientation. Your apse would be on the east and your entrance on the west. However, the narthex is at an angle. And there are 2 reasons possibly for this. More than likely, a street came along at some point, and the street's out here, and someone built the narthex parallel to the street. So when the viewer goes in to this lighted narthex and enters in through any of these columns, you're disoriented. You're not facing the apse, and anybody entering a church would assume they would face the apse. So you come into this circular place, and you have to shift your orientation. And what that does to the viewer is it's more of a oh my aha moment, because you're even more surprised by what you see, and it takes you a minute to grab it. So, and that's all intentional. So looking at this central plan church, this is a concentric octagon. The center, this is the nave, if you can imagine. And of course, Orthodox churches have different services than the Catholic Mass. As we approach the apse, we go through this square shape room, I'm going to call it, and this is called the sanctuary in this church, and we use sanctuary in a different way. And it is cross-vaulted. Here's the altar, and we're going to study this in a minute. And here's your apse. And
of note, that's how we use sanctuary in the Episcopal Church too. The sanctuary is technically the place behind the altar railing, in our nave and in our church building as well. So
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Methodist church, and the sanctuary was the nave.
Same for me in the evangelical tradition. The sanctuary was the entire church.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, absolutely. Well, anyway, so I want you to notice these scalloped semicircles. These are a takeoff. They're really similar to an apse as they circulate through and around this circular nave. And this area is an ambulatory, and we saw it's a walkway, basically a covered walkway. Of course, the second story is over it, so this would be shaded or dark. When the viewer entered, you would come from light into dark, and all of a sudden you would face the glory of this dome over you. So, and these are very large pillars that support this dome. And as you can see, looking at this church, it has not a lot of supporting structure. It's an illusion of this all appears as lightness. So we'll go inside in just a minute. Another view, the apse and these side chapels, just showing you a little of its setting. And here's the cross section, your main floor, your gallery, and your dome. And this would be the narthex. So you can get a little sense of the elevation here. And this is the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia. It looks much closer in this photograph than it is, but remember, it's also in Ravenna. So we have entered the church. We are standing in the center of the nave looking at the apse.
Wow.
So just talking you through some of the architectural changes here, which are enormous, because this is so different than anything we have looked at. So I mentioned these gigantic piers, 8 of them, that support the center of the church. So look at the different marble and patterned sections. This all comes from the east meaning Constantinople and further east, and very Persian, strong Persian influence here. The columns are thinner, they're lighter, they have, this is, we'll see them closer up, ornamentation, acanthus leaves, scroll work, and then this, what's called an impost block that transitions into your arches or arcades. So where you see the light around here, that's the ambulatory, and it's receiving light from here. It's really covered by your second floor, which is second story, which is your gallery. Looking at the apse, we're going to look at this mosaic, and then we're going to look at this mosaic and this mosaic, which are the real reasons that the majority of tourists are drawn into this church. Not us, but the tourists, the general tourists who know nothing about art and maybe not religion, but they're on a tour. So, but they want to see these two mosaics. Okay, so I'm looking now at the ceiling, the cross vault over the sanctuary. And this is the center, this is your dome. But look at this, just amazing. All of this is mosaic, if you can believe it. I mean, wow. It's incredible.
So that's Christ in the center. Who is flanking Christ in those?
No, right here?
No, further down. Right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's the apostles.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, I haven't really dissected this because I can't talk about everything. But I want to talk about the sacrificial lamb and the wreath. And this is blurry, but it gives you another view, and also of the upper gallery and how every single thing under every arch, everything is mosaic. So here's the center, which is this lamb who is haloed. It's supposed to be a lamb. And this triumphal wreath, it's called, that is around him. And this, of course, would have been a perfect circle that's skewed from the angle of the photography. And these four angels. But look at the decoration. Look at these arabesque and these animals. This is all Eastern and Persian influence coming from Constantinople. And also this heavy patterning. We didn't see this in the Roman architecture. Maybe if they were showing landscape, we in the mosaic, apse mosaic in Classe, but for the most part, this is a little different. It's and certainly more intense. But these, of course, are in the posture of orants or worshipers. So here we are under the dome, looking at under the dome, looking again at these beautiful arcades. And here is our apse and these mosaics David asked about. Another view under the dome. More, I mean, it's just covered with mosaics. And here you can see how decorative these columns are with their impost blocks. So, you know, in looking at Christian art, we also look at architecture just as much as mosaics. And the pillars, see, we started out with these blocks of patterned marble, and we end up with these fluted columns really at the top, or tops of the piers that go into these circular or barrel arches. But look at the flowering. It's just incredible. So here we are again. We're standing in the sanctuary and we're looking at the apse. And I just want to mention all of this is covered, as I've said. The sides over here and the upper side of the apse, or over really the sanctuary, these are scenes of the Old Testament and New Testament. And for the most part, they have to do with sacrifice, which I found interesting. But we just don't have time to look at anything. And this is a sunflower surrounded with angels on either side.
So I do have a question. So everything is covered with mosaic here. Was that something kind of intended in the original design, or is it one of those things that they continued to do over the years until it was covered?
It's how the early Christians went from wall painting to decoration. You know, because we've seen it for about 150 years. It was permanent, and it's glass again. You know, it's for the. I mean, as far as I know, it's all glass. So, as opposed to marble or stone, which would have been used on the floors. So, looking at this, we'll go on, and here are our two side mosaics, the north and the south side. This, of course, is east. And this is blurry, but it gives you a little more of a sense of the columns. You can see how ornamented this is with these compost blocks, and yet elegantly thin compared to the mass that the Romans tended to convey. Another beautiful view of the apse. So digging into this apse mosaic, we see Christ again as young, unbearded, and robed in regal attire, that of an emperor or a person of a leadership role. And he is sitting on an orb. This, of course, is symbolic of the world. and of his place dominant in the world. The Z, finally I found what something means, is the first letter of the Greek word for life. So, and it's in a lot of Byzantine mosaics. We see him with a halo with a cross, and beautiful stones. These would be your red and blue clouds. We've seen those before. So there's a lot of story going on here. Oh, and he's over the four rivers of paradise. So let's take the right side first. Ecclesias was the bishop under Theodoric, the our Arian emperor before Justinian. And this church actually had the foundation started the last year of Theodoric's death by Ecclesias. And then that would have been 526. And in 527, Justinian from Constantinople had his general invade and capture Ravenna. And Ravenna had always been the capital, remember, of the Western Empire. And when Justinian captured it, it became the administrative city of the Eastern Empire. So, and Justinian, oddly enough, there's no record that he ever was there, although his presence is enormous. So this church is being handed by Ecclesias, the bishop, under the Arian Theodoric, to and Justinian is giving credit to the Arians and Ecclesias for starting the church. It's being handed through the angel, and these are Michael and Gabriel, to Christ. Christ is holding a scroll that is the seven seals, which is the from the book of Revelations. And he is handing the crown of the martyr's crown, to our Saint Vitalis, or San Vitali, our church, San Vitalis. And if you'll notice, everyone has on sandals except San Vitalis, who has on boots. And the reason is San Vitalis was a soldier. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his life because it's quite interesting. He was born in Milan, and he ended up living in Ravenna. He served in the emperor's army, and he was martyred in Ravenna under the reign of Marcus Aurelius in 171. The reason he was martyred was he was friendly with a Roman consul there named Paulinus. And Paulinus, Vitalis had a friend, or was friendly with a local doctor. And when they found out the local doctor was a Christian, they executed him. And Vitalis actually buried him. And his Roman counselor friend Paulinus found out about it and confronted him and said, "Why would you honor a Christian by burying him?" And Vitalis said, "Well, I, sir, am a proud Christian." And at that point, he was racked, and the legend says buried alive. So he was buried at the site where this church was built. To my knowledge, there are no remains of him, relics of him here. But that's the story of the church and Vitalis, and this, why he's in boots. Some details of Christ and the scroll of seven seals, the martyr's crown, Vitalis, Ecclesias, and just here we are with the white lilies, referencing, of course, the Virgin Mary. And look at this side. Isn't this incredible? I mean, it's just amazing. And really 20 years is not a very long time to be building this church.
No, not at all.
more, and here's a detail of your left side.
Mm.
And I found an old mosaic of San Vitalis. I'm not sure of the date of it. And also, this is from a 14th century French manuscript, the Burial Alive of San Vitalis.
Oh, that's what that is. Okay, I can see it now. It took me a minute.
Yeah, yeah. Back to the church, and I just want to remind you of, you are a pilgrim. You're coming into this church. The narthex is bright, the ambulatory is dark, and you enter and
Mm.
imagine what you just saw. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just,
You go from darkness to light to grandeur.
yes. And here's the floor, which I think is just beautiful. You can see some more of this patterning, this marble on the columns.
Is that a labyrinth?
I don't know. It's not described, it's not talked about as one in
No,
anything
no,
I've read.
no.
But I just think it's so
It's
beautiful.
beautiful.
The directing, of course, we're looking at the entrance. So, all right. So I'm showing you now the two most famous Byzantine mosaics ever. I would put my money on that. The one of Emperor Justinian and his attendants, and also the one of Theodora, his wife. So this would be on the north side of the apse, and the reason for what you're seeing is distortion is because it curves, and your apse is over here, and Christ is up here. The apse mosaic. So I think it's obvious to everyone that we have a scene here of the Eucharist, or part of it. We have Justinian robed, of course, as an emperor in all of his crowning glory, and also haloed. And the source of the halo is really Persian. There also, way back in Egypt, there were some halos in various wall paintings, but for the most part, it's a Persian element. So if we look to the Justinian's left, we see his bishop, who consecrated the church in 547, Maximianus, and he is holding a cross, and it's very clear he's a man of the church. And we have two bishops, archdeacons, whoever they are. One is holding the gospel, and the other incense burner. And if we look in between, and this is supposedly a banker. So we have the church, the empire, and the banker. If we go to the right of Justinian, we have the military. And these are his different soldiers over here. And this is the shield of Constantine. It's all throughout art. With the Cairo, this is supposedly the epiphany that Constantine had before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and we've talked about that. That gave him a sign to become a Christian, and of course that's beginning of our Christian world, at least as far as art. And sort of some freedoms with art. I want to point out that this is full Byzantine style. So we'll talk about some of the characteristics, and we've seen them before. There is a weightlessness, first of all. That's what I see. These figures seem to not have volume. They're flat, they're floating. There are no shadows. They have tiny feet. And again, these little bit enlarged eyes, some figures more than others. And we also see sort of these are you get the sense that it's schematic somewhat, that there's sort of a formula for a figure and it's filled in, especially if we look at the army. These are fairly generic faces. But if we look at the more important figures, Justinian is distinctive. Every image of him anywhere, he looks basically the same. And Maximianus, I would say that's probably a portrait of him. It's so distinct from the other figures. And also the banker. These two start to be a little more generic, although some different hair shapes. But when you look over here, it's pretty much generic faces. So if we talk about this in symbolism, which is a big part of art in the Christian world, is story and symbolism. What we're seeing here is the presentation of gifts to Christ, who is up here in the apse. We also see the really strong power of empire, church, military. And that is the strength of this Byzantine world. Also, don't forget to notice that we have a gold background. The gold heavens, we've seen the gold heavens before. Keep in mind, try to look for consistencies and also differences. Any questions on this, David? Any comments or anything?
No, it's
So
fascinating.
I do want to say a little bit about Theodoric. He was considered extremely pious. He drank no alcohol. He fasted. He was considered attractive, tall, and he was extremely intelligent. And of course, as any emperor ruler, he had a ruthless side. But we're looking at his best characteristics. Some details here that I think you might see a little more in. Look at the ankle, I'm going to say patterns, bracelets, and check out the feet on top here. I'm not sure what that means. We talked about feet before. The most important person having their foot forward closest to us. So we would say Maximian. But look at the bowl of bread, the bowl of the Eucharist overlapping, holding back Maximianus. So there is a struggle here with church and state, or an equality. So I love to pick it apart. Some details here. You can see the enlarged eyes continue. In Byzantine art, usually it's a direct deer in the hair-like stare. I think that's probably a lot easier to do than anything with much more expression. But just amazing faces, really. I wanted to just remind you of flatness, of symbolism, where we have two things going on here. Aaron, remember we talked about the flatness here, and Aaron, the symbolizes the image of Aaron is the same as Aaron. The image of the tabernacle is the same as the tabernacle, the same power. Any church built anywhere has the same power as St. Peter's or the temple in Jerusalem. And that is true of an emperor also, that he has. It's just like he was here. It's supposed to be read as his presence in this church. So comparing a different style, if we go back to Lot and Abraham, this very classical Roman contrapposto, these figures have weight, the gesture, the facial expressions through this pantomime that's telling the story, and yet the flatness here, the lack of weight, the story is here but told differently. And another detail, this I'm showing you because you can really see the mosaic qualities here. Their faces, I mean, I just can't imagine how you get a face. So anyway, in mosaic, but they did. So here it is on the wall as it curves in the apse, which is another feat of artistry. Mm-hmm. And you can see some more of the patterning through here, the different details and shapes. And we go to the south side. This is directly opposite Justinian's. So a couple of things are going on here. We have obviously visible the separation of men and women. And we know they were separated all throughout antiquity and, into really probably the Renaissance. And we also know about Theodora and know that she was really a supporter of women's rights and equality. And she is shown here as a co-equal ruler of the Byzantine Empire. And stories of her are fascinating. She was a belly dancer at the Hippodrome. Justinian was in love with her for years. He married her when he was 40. He had never been married. And she really is the Nefertiti or Cleopatra of the Byzantine world. She was described as incredibly beautiful, witty, very strong in personality and nature. She was a huge collaborator and a supporter to him, even during wars. And he really loved her. She died in 548 and he lived to 565. And he described her as his gift from God. Wow. He never remarried and they never had children. So let's talk about this. These are obviously her ladies in waiting, but we have head clusters here, which we've seen before, and we have very genetic, schematic faces and also clothing, although very beautiful. And you can just guess where this came from, the whole Persian Eastern world, all of these patterns from even the Orient, because trade was huge already. And this, of course, is the side of the church, the bishops or archbishops. And
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but is she passing along the chalice?
Yes.
And so you had the bread on one side and the chalice on the other. So you see the kind of the equality there. That is fascinating.
That's right. She has the chalice and they're going into the church. Christ, of course, is up here in the apse. But again, this is the other side of the Eucharist.
It kind of lends movement to both. Now that I kind of see them together, it lends a sense of movement and kind of coming together. That's neat.
It's so fascinating because it's such a blend of the imperial element of it and the religious element. And they are, obviously serving and partaking in the Eucharist. And the sort of theme of these two mosaics actually is redemption. So through the Eucharist. And they are passing by, of course, the baptismal font. Again, look at the flatness, the Byzantine style, the direct stare, and this enormous patterning, gorgeous throughout her mosaic. And I want to mention her robe because this is so significant. You might recognize these three figures as the three magi. And they also came bearing gifts, which Theodora and Justinian are doing. So it's just rich. It really is with symbolism. I have a detail of this blurry a little. but look at the shoes. I mean, everything is just, you can't take your eyes off of it. And it's just incredible how the artistry here, the folds in her robe hid the third, you know, like he's going behind it, and they are going uphill to Christ, you might notice also. So it's just, there's just so much to look at and talk about. And this beautiful blending, of course, of the, I guess, water and the land down here, stream. Detail. Now, I don't know that I would describe her as breathtakingly beautiful, but she has been. I want to mention, if anybody's really interested, Procopius was a disenchanted secretary to Justinian, and he wrote a book called The Sacred History. And you can read all you want to ever know about these two. And also, our next stop is in Constantinople. I'm going to call it Constantinople. It's, of course, Istanbul. And he also wrote about Hagia Sophia. So it's a great source of information. And this is another one just showing that curve. A little stronger in pigmentation here. I think the other one was more accurate, but I like this just to remind us of the passing of the Eucharist to Christ. So we're taking a large trip. I guess it would have been on foot or in some sort of caravan at that point. We are seeing for the first time since Rome and Greece the name of artists. Anthemius and Isidorus were, I'm going to not use the word architect, but they were called theoretical scientists because they were not only mathematicians and architects and physicists and vaulting specialists. It took an amazing feat of some genius we don't even understand to come up with Hagia Sophia. So if you check the date, you will see this was built before San Vitale. This was considered the most important of Justinian's monuments, built in his home city of Constantinople. So you obviously know that it's a mosque now. The minarets were added in 1609 to 1616. So it took a while after the Ottoman Turks invaded and took over Constantinople in 1453 for the Muslim faith to erect these. So they're quite old, but there was a lapse period, sort of. So the building itself is just enormous, and it is original except for the dome. And the dome, actually, the first dome built by Anthemius and Isidorus was destroyed or damaged severely in a 558 earthquake, and was rebuilt immediately. And this is the dome that was rebuilt in 558. So let's take another view. This is a side wall and this dome. And I want you're going to see a floor plan in a minute, but this is so unusual. This has semidomes on either side, semi-apses. So we're looking at an apse in the center that's a square with a dome, a round dome over it, and then two semidomes, half circles, and two half-circled apses on either side. It's most unusual and unique, and I don't know that there's anything like it. So here's our floor plan. Here's our entrance. And this would have been the nave in the Greek Orthodox Church. And you can see that it is a square held up. The walls and the dome are supported by these mammoth pillars, and they are just enormous, piers actually. and we enter. We have what's called a semi-apse here, and a semi-apse here, and a tiny apse here, and this would of course be the sanctuary. And we're going to look at the dome, which is enormous, 180 feet tall. I believe it's 112 wide. And you can get a sense. And of course, these would be your side aisles in some of the churches we've been visiting so far. Here's the cross section, your main floor. This would be your semidome, your smaller dome, half dome over your side apses, and this would be your higher dome. Here we are. So the Islamic Muslim incantations, prayers are hung all around, and for the most part, the architecture is exactly the same. There have been periods where the Christian mosaics were whitewashed. They were actually yellow washed. They used yellow paint, I think, because when the light came in and hit the yellow paint, it was brighter, or it resembled more the rest of the church. The darkness here is, I think this is a dark photograph. I'm not so sure that this is this dark, and I have not been there. So here would be our square. These are our massive piers down here that go into a new feature of architect called a Pindentif. And these are the triangular pieces here that support the dome, this mammoth dome, and take the weight of it into the gigantic piers. And when you look at this building, you don't see the structure. Everything is light and beautiful and elegant, and it's all hidden. The genius of these architects is just stunning, and particularly in the 6th century. I'm just going to show you some different lighting here that brightens up these arcades some. This is, of course, our apse, our semidome, and we are standing under the main dome. I'm not sure. This is not early Christian or Byzantine here. I'm not sure what that is. So this is the Eastern apse. And one of the mosaics that remains, that was, to my knowledge, never painted over, is the Virgin and Child. And I do have a detail of it in a minute. The Islamic world did not believe in using the human image anywhere. Everything was a pattern. It could be a pattern, a vegetal pattern or geometric pattern that was repetitive. They had beautiful patterns, beautiful variations, as you can see up in here, but nothing that was figurative. So here we are looking straight up at the ceiling, our center dome and our 2 side domes, semidomes. This has 40 lights in between the ribs. Here's our center, sort of a sunburst with this Islamic lettering, prayers around the side. These beautiful bands of ribs are just gorgeous, and your 40 lights. And these would be your side walls.
I mean, it's dizzying just looking at a photo.
Isn't it? I know it is.
I can only imagine how kind of overwhelming and dizzying and glorious it must be in person.
Mm-hmm. And I have now a couple of, I believe they're 17th or 18th century etchings of Hagia Sophia. They do have the incantations, but it's a little lighter, brighter, and it gives us this sense of going back to the gold, to the gold of heaven. And see again, look at these pendentives coming down into the piers. You don't even see the piers. It's just amazing. It's just a trick. Incredible. Okay, so here we are under now the side aisle and looking out into the nave. And you can see that our capitals on our columns have changed. Our columns are taller, they're thinner and lighter. So the feeling of lightness and brightness is just pervasive here as opposed to mass. Back to our center. I like to keep coming back to reference. Just that I wish that this looked as large as it is. So here is a schematic of our pendentif. So this is our central dome with the 40 lights, and these are the pendentifs, which are concrete, and they transfer the weight of this dome into the 4 giant piers over the center square of the nave. And here we are again. These are our 4 piers that basically support everything but the side walls. And back to our center. The Eastern Apse mosaic, the Semidome mosaic, is the Virgin and Child. And these, every emperor had his input on this after Justinian built it. And I'll say every Eastern emperor from the Eastern Empire. And this was actually done in the 9th century. And you can see that it has a different style. It's still Byzantine, and we'll talk about the later Byzantine period at the end of this. But you can see that it has more substance, I'll put it that way, more weight, a little more contrapposto in her foot coming forward. It's more advanced, yes.
Is there any sense as to why this particular figure remained? I know that Mary is honored and revered in Islamic tradition.
And they recognize Jesus. It's just they don't worship him. So I'm just assuming that it's, part of their history, so to speak. Yeah, it is interesting, and it was done later. So that I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it. Yeah. And this beautiful view, which is my favorite, on the Bosporus Strait going through Istanbul, which is just a glorious setting. Okay, we're moving from Constantinople down to Israel, to Mount Tabor, and then we'll go to Mount Sinai. This is still Justinian, under the rule of Justinian. This church, Church of the Transfiguration, that we're presently looking at,
I have been there.
Oh yeah, you can help me.
I don't know how much I remember, but
this was built in 1924, and it's a Franciscan monastery. But the initial location was selected by a bishop, or decided on by a bishop, as Mount Tabor in 348. And Justinian actually built a church there, and parts of it, the grotto, the chapels, do you remember those, David? They're part of the original church that Justinian built. And Justinian was a lot like Constantine, because he wanted to make his presence on every site that was historically important to Christ. And this is supposedly the site of the Transfiguration. And there's apparently a glorious mosaic here that's all gold of the Transfiguration. Would you like to add anything?
No, we would celebrate our prayers and Eucharist in the outdoor areas mostly, because we couldn't get into to celebrate in the church building itself. The grounds are incredible. If I remember correctly, there's a There's a place inside the church itself where supposedly was the foot. Lots of great stuff. Lots of fun stuff.
Okay. But it does have Justinian's history. So moving into Egypt and Mount Sinai and the site of the St. Catherine Monastery. And I know we all know about that. It's just an amazing, beautiful place. So monasteries, everyone knows, are places of quiet and reflection and meditation and prayer. And this one is located in the middle of a desert of a 100-mile radius. So it's quite isolated. It was started by Justinian, and it's had, of course, like everything else, many lives. And I might mention that St. Catherine is St. Catherine of Alexandria, close by. And she was a 3rd century martyr who her head and hands were brought here to the monastery in the 10th century. And I think at that point it was renamed St. Catherine's. But this is all associated with Moses and the burning bush. So here, a little more of the monastery, slightly blurry. Have you been here? No. Okay.
Nope.
It's walled in, which is fortress protected, which is interesting. And, hopefully never destroyed. So we're looking at 2 amazing paintings. We're back to paintings. And encaustic is painting on panel where the paint is mixed with wax. And it has a history of durability. A lot of Romans used it as portrait painting, particularly for funerals, funereal portraits, or maybe portraits that were put in graves of the deceased. And it's really a beautiful technique, has a little sheen to it. It's basically a water-based paint usually. And it has a history of surviving. So let's look at the Virgin and Child between saints and angels. And I think you will see some different styles here, hopefully. So our Virgin is not looking at us, first of all, which I find so interesting. She has a slight shift in her focus. And she's holding baby Jesus. And we see a lot of baby Jesus as a little tiny sort of semi-mature boy, not so much an infant. Haloed, everyone's haloed here. So we're all in divine. She is seated in a throne. So this is, of course, after the Council of Ephesus, where she is deemed to be assured of being Mother of God. On her, either side of her are Theodore on her left and George on her right, who are the warrior saints who are protectors of the faith in the Christian world. You see them in a lot of churches. Notice the difference in the 2, and also in Madonna if you just look at facial structure. Theodore seems to perhaps be from a different country, and which I love. George is a little more classical, typical European look. And then if we shift back to the angels,
they're very expressive.
They are. Yes, and and if we look at the angels, they have much more of an antique quality. They remind me a little of the Abraham and Lot mosaics, in that they seem to be communicating probably with Christ in their glance. And so we have a little pantomime of sort going on with them. But the 3 figures in the front have more of a frontal glance even if a little skewed to the side. But I find her she's really thoughtful, I think, her expression, introspective. And this is something we haven't seen yet. So I'm ending. My last image is this icon of Christ. And there's, as far as icons, I'll talk a little bit about their history. Dennis Photinus is really the authority, but an icon could be in the public place and large, as in a church or a place of worship or someone's home large, or it could be small, something that you held in your hand. And the image in the icon is the presence of the person is in the image of the icon. So when we are looking at Christ in this icon, we are looking directly at Christ, and we can ask anything we want of Christ and communicate with Christ. So it's a direct reality. The image and the reality are the same. So this is, as you can see, it was a quite large icon for icons. Christ is haloed, we've seen before. Interesting that the cross is not behind him, because we usually see it. It is in small lines here, but it's not very prominent. And of course, he's holding the gospel book. Book of the gospel, and we see his hand in this blessing that we've seen a few times before. We've also seen the hand raised, but not as open as this, as he passes on a blessing to us, the viewer. What I want to talk about with him is naturalism, because we haven't seen an image of a person. And of course, this is paint and not mosaic, so it's easier to convey a more naturalistic image. But this is not far from a Renaissance painting if we don't look at his eyes. So this was done, and I know that icons are very strictly controlled, but initially someone had to do this icon before it was copied, and 1 million copies, and probably most of us have one. But it's just fascinating to me how almost real it looks. So this would be an example, going back to cave painting, of naturalism, of painting from memory, of trying to recognize the qualities of a human being and represent those. And what we want to focus on is the eyes here. The eyes have been interpreted as one eye in the real world and one eye in the spiritual world, the world of the divine. So that
fully human, fully divine.
Fully human, fully divine. And that just gives you chills. It really does. So this is the end of my images, but I just want to wrap up with a few sentences. Justinian died in 565. In 570, Muhammad was born in Mecca. He died in 632 in Medina. And he was, as we all know, a messenger of God, not a Messiah. And he the word was the Quran, the word of God. So Christianity is faced with this new religion starting in the 7th century. And also in 730, we have Pope Leo III, who passes an edict, an iconoclastic edict, banning religious images. So I want to just say that this ban, this iconoclastic controversy ban was for the most part in the Eastern Empire. The Western Empire really ignored it, although it did slow down the production of religious works. It did not affect secular art. It actually increased secular art. So that it gave it a boost. But if it had not been for the continuation of some religious images, it's felt that Christianity would not have survived, because this is how Christianity was passed along and taught, is through art and manuscripts, and manuscripts were considered part of this band also. Although they did continue in the West, and the iconophiles, the monks in the monasteries, did continue them even in the East. The Eastern emperors actually supported this, and it ended in 843. And at that point, Byzantine art picks up with Middle Byzantine and Late Byzantine, and we have what's called the second golden era of Byzantine art. But we're ending here before the controversy and before Muhammad. So that's it.
It's almost a fascinating full circle, Jennine, because we started in this place where the art was rushed and hurried because it was kind of done in secret, because Christianity wasn't kind of exactly legal, and then became legal, and it flourished with all this art. And then the powers that be passed some iconoclastic laws, and the art again contracted in a way because of the authorities. It's a fascinating way that it kind of went full circle. But what an incredible journey you have brought us through and on, Jennine. I cannot thank you enough. And I'm sure I speak for all those who have been participating at home or on their computers, that I feel deeply enlightened and engaged with a part of our history that I was not as familiar with. So you can read the history, but to see the history in this way is particularly wonderful and moving. So thank you so much, Jennine.
Well, it was really my pleasure. I mean, I loved every minute. So there.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jennine. I hope you'll send Jennine a note to say thank you as well. It's been a wonderful journey. And remember that next week we start our summer walking through the story of David in 1st and 2nd Samuel. So join us at 9 a.m. next week for our ongoing series on 1st and 2nd Samuel and King David. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.